welcome to the first episode of Mission Ready, the VA Disability Podcast.
Oh, I'm very excited about this one.
Yeah, this is where we're going to break down the VA claims disability process one conversation at a time. I'm the host, Dr. Marshall Bahr, physician, disabled combat veteran, and I have my co-host here, Josh Ackler. He also disabled combat veteran, Purple Heart recipient, and former VSO veteran service officer who is now the director of our veteran outreach.
Yes, much appreciated.
Yeah, so we're very excited to be here. I think this first episode, even the podcast in general, I think what the goal of it is, we had talked about, is we really want to empower veterans, educate veterans, especially those going through the VA disability claims process, because it can be a little nuanced, a little confusing, a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy. Why are we doing this podcast, and why now? I want to talk about a little anecdotal personal story about my journey, right? So, would you be surprised if I told you, as a special operations combat medic in, the 75th Ranger Regiment, that I have PTSD?
Oh, that's totally
Yeah, newsflash, right? Yeah. So, yeah, I, like many veterans, don't know how to ask for help, am too macho to ask for help. And so I did what a lot of veterans do when they don't know how to be vulnerable and ask for help: maladaptive coping behaviors. And for me, what did that look like? It looked like substance abuse, because I was trying to, dull those memories, quiet the sounds. And, it finally got to the point for me where I was like, I need help. I really need help. Someone needs to help me out. But how do I do that? And so I filed for a VA claim. I thought that was the right thing to do. And so I filed, and I was having nightmares, flashbacks. I was crippling panic attacks. I was not doing well. And on top of it, I was trying to mask it with these substances, right? Which is not helping, obviously.
Right.
And so I did my claim. I did my CMP exam. And, I thought it went well. Months later, nothing's fast in the VA. I find out that, I come back and they gave me a 10% rating for PTSD, because they didn't think it was severe enough. And then on top of it, they said, well, it's probably not your PTSD. It's probably your substance abuse that's causing this. And so they minimized what I was doing. And they said they didn't even see it as a maladaptive coping mechanism. They just saw it as, well, we're just going to blame it on this so we don't service connect them.
Right.
And so what that really did for me, it was really deflating. It made me feel like the system is stacked against veterans. And so I had this kind of, I was disgruntled, and it made me not want to apply again. And I think I'm not alone. I'm learning now that a lot of veterans feel that way. They've had a lot of similar experiences, right?
I think a lot of veterans themselves are going to have the same kind of skills. I'm going to say it for myself. I resorted to alcohol, and I was in and out of substance abuse programs while I was in service.
Yeah, this happens. It's a real thing. It happens.
And I shared it.
Doesn't discriminate who it chooses, right?
And I shared that room with many Marines, and we, it's all we did. We covered it up with alcohol. We were just like, I'm not going to go.
Mm-hmm.
But I see a lot of veterans that come in and they do their VA claim, and then they're denied. And it's like, no, keep fighting. Like, keep going, because this is something that you deserve, or they'll get such a low rating. And I see it a lot with PTSD.
A big one I see is a lot of guys don't want to admit to suicidal thoughts because they think they're going to lose their guns. They think they're going to get sent to the psych ward, which is not the case. And so what happens is they have a real issue, and then they get a lower service-connected rating because they're not being honest.
Right.
Because they're scared.
They're scared.
Understandably.
Or they get denied, and they're just like, in your case where you said you got 10%, and it's just like so deflating.
I know, and it's so it doesn't just affect you, it affects your family. I remember my wife, she was like, what, this doesn't make sense. Because the loved ones around you, they know how bad these things are. Right. And so when they see it too, it's even more deflating. And that's actually one of the reasons why we decided to do this podcast. It's not, it's not just about nexus letters and what we do. It's really, we want to use this as a platform for veterans who are going through this process to learn about different disabilities. What's a primary claim? What's a secondary claim? What's a CMP exam? What are the different CFR 30A disabilities that you can claim? What can be secondary to that claim?
Right.
Right? Because I think you mentioned it, right? The CMP examiners, a lot of the times, well, first of all, the VA is so backlogged that they have to hire third-party, people like QTC to come in and do their exams. And I mean, I don't want to, I'm not here to downplay this, but a lot of times these companies, they'll hire any warm body with credentials to do these exams. What does that mean? It means you could have a brand new 26-year-old nurse practitioner fresh out of school or an 80-year-old dermatologist trying to evaluate you for sleep apnea.
Oh,
While they're medical providers, it's not in their wheelhouse. And so they might not understand how sleep apnea can be secondary to PTSD.
oh yeah.
Again, it just shows what the veteran's going against. And on top of it, these examiners, 95% of the time, they are not veterans. They don't know. So a veteran will go, well, I told them I was an 11 Bravo. I was infantry. And then I was a paratrooper.
I have no idea.
They didn't, I don't know why I get connected from my back and knees that are all messed up from doing 70 plus static line jumps.
Right.
Well, and I tell them that they don't know. They don't know what 11 Bravo is. They don't know what it's like to be in the infantry, what it's like to jump out of a plane, 1,200 feet above the earth and falling and hitting the ground like a sack of turds.
You're not following so softly.
How do they, tell their story and orate it to these examiners and through their personal statements, through their witness testimonies, through their evidence in order to increase their chance of winning the case?
Right.
Because reality is, not every veteran needs a nexus letter.
I call it the pie. So you got the in-service, then the chronicity of care, and a current diagnosis.
Yeah.
And it's like, so it's like so sometimes there's missing pieces of the pie. But when you have all the pieces, sometimes you just don't need the nexus letter because it's all there.
Perfect world. I don't want anyone to come to us or have to use any of these paid services. I want to see veterans be able to do it free of charge. And that's what what we're going to do with these episodes is break down complex issues into bite-sized and understandable topics, right? And what the hope is that we are providing education and resources to the veteran that they then can use to help out their own case and hopefully prevent them from having to even go and get a nexus letter, right? But right, there are cases where it's almost you're likely going to probably need one. We want to be able to not only talk about disabilities they can claim, but processes and operations that are changing with the guidelines and regulations, which are changing every year. I think it's a lot of confusion too. Is like what is what's a fully developed claim versus a partial claim? What's a supplemental? What's a higher level review? What's an appeal? A lot of guys, even me, I remember when I first started even getting into this, it's confusing, right? So we want to break that down.
There's so many forms. There's so much out there, but the VA doesn't really explain it too much to veterans.
No. Not at all.
It's basic. You just go to it's just basic things, but there's so much more that's beyond that spectrum that shows different ways to appeal things. You can have an informal conference with someone, just to tell your story.
Yeah.
And be like, why did you got denied for, like, you got 10% for your PTSD.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're like, how? Like, I have all these conditions and all these symptoms.
Yes.
And I'm dumbfounded. Well, what you could have done, instead of just stopping and saying, okay, well, I'm going to fight this again, you could immediately would have done a higher level review. And that's just talking to a rater. Like we're just talking right now, it's just, you're on the phone and you're just trying to explain your story.
Yeah.
And that right there could have saved you so much time.
Yeah, I mean, we want to be the go-to resource for veterans and veterans' families when it comes to learning about this stuff. And, how are we going to accomplish that? Well, you and I will be talking, during every episode. And then we plan to bring in expert, guests as well, special guests that are experts in their chosen field. They can talk about, PTSD, mental health issues, common claimed issues, uncommonly claimed issues, military sexual trauma, some of these other things that, are just, that are kind of unknown unknowns for people, and making them aware that these are actually claimed disabilities and that they could be leaving compensation and benefits out there.
I've seen you do it before where you're like, hey, did you see this in your medical record? Do you see this in your medical record? Like, it's all over your medical record. oh, I didn't know that I can claim that. And it's like, man, you've been missing out on so much money.
It's funny, I often joke, that I can tell how broken a veteran is by how thin their in-service treatment records are.
Right.
If they got all these, back, knee, shoulder, ankle, they're paratrooper, and then they come to me like, I got nothing in my service record. Well, then I say, oh, I know you were, you did it, because as part of that culture.
Sucked it up and kept going. Or you were fearful that you're going to not be, you're going to be left out. My friends now that I still talk to, they say, man, I downplayed it so much because I didn't want to be on the deployable. I didn't want to get removed from the unit. So I just kept my mouth shut, and it's disservice to them right now.
Starting out, just kind of get to know each other a little bit so the audience can know who I am, know who you are for future episodes.
Oh, yes.
Like I said, I'm Dr. Marshall Bahr. I was in the Army. I was in Special Operations. I was in the 75th Ranger Regiment, specifically 1st Ranger Battalion in Savannah, Georgia, which is amazing. And went on multiple combat tours. I think I did something around 500 plus direct action combat missions. I was also a Special Operations combat medic with them, which is kind of how I got my introduction into medicine. And, right around my 7-year mark, I was at the point where I was transitioning. Do I get out? Do I stay in? And I just met my wife, and we made the decision that I would get out and transition into medicine. So I figured if I'm going to do medicine, I got to go all the way and be a doctor, right? And so here at Overachiever, I go on and pursue medicine. I go to Ohio State for undergrad and then Nebraska for medical school. I do my residency and postdoc training in Pittsburgh at UPMC and Allegheny Health Network. And then, I start practicing medicine, and eventually, I started an addiction treatment center where I was helping veterans with both substance abuse and mental health disorders. And it was during that process I was discovering that there was a lot of veterans that were not service connected for opioid use disorder, alcohol use disorder. And so I was working with them and helping them out and doing these medical opinions, which I found out were called nexus letters.
Right.
And, I thought it would be a one-off, a service that we could offer for these veterans for free. And I started realizing this was becoming a kind of a big issue, kind of an epidemic. And I started reflecting on my own personal experience in the VA disability process and how difficult it was. And
most definitely, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, you could speak on your part, but I remember when I first went through, did not get what I thought I was going to get the first time. You think you're doing one thing, you get another thing. They love to deny. They love that big rubber stamp that says deny.
Stamp of denial.
There are other companies out there like us. Unfortunately, they don't necessarily have the best interest in hand, right? So we see a lot of exorbitant fees.
Things were just so convoluted. It could be a very big hassle.
That's why we're here, right? Hopefully we can remove some of these barriers. So why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
My name is Josh Ackler. So I was in the Navy, but I was a hospital corpsman for the Marine Expeditionary Forces for 13 years.
Wow.
So multiple combat.
Grunt. I'm actually surprised how articulate you are for a Marine. So this is impressive.
I didn't eat my crayons this morning. So I always knew I wanted to do medical and I wanted to get deployed. So that's why I decided to become a hospital corpsman. So multiple combat tours. I got hurt twice. So wrong place, wrong time.
We like to call that the enemy marksmanship badge. Purple heart.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, I had to get 2 of them. So to go along with that, like what you were saying about like how hard it is to do your first claims, it was heavily documented in my service record. I did it, I made sure, because as a corpsman, I'm doing the notes. So I'm doing notes on myself to make sure that all this stuff was in my record. And I try to claim hearing loss because I'm deaf, and that IED messed me up pretty good. It split me open. And there was a lot of shrapnel that was stuck in my head. I had to get a lot of surgeries. They said my hearing loss was subjective. I didn't know that was a subjective claim.
You'd be surprised how many veterans I talk to on a daily basis that say that. Field artillery officers, they didn't give me tinnitus. They didn't give me hearing loss. I'm sitting next to these howitzer cannons. How could that be?
Yeah, like it's like it should be a gimme. Maybe not recorded or you never said anything. Well, most people didn't. I mean, anytime the
Yeah.
came, I was like, here's some socks of Motrin, get over with.
Yeah, I mean, I was a medic too, right? So we were ingrained, it's just, the culture.
Right.
You suck it up. Drink water, eat some Motrin, drive on, right? Take a knee face out. 100%.
Because at that time when you're 18, 19 years old, you're not thinking about the future when you get out for a disability. So you're just like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to deal with it. And then later on in life, once you get, into your 30s and you're like, holy crap, my knees hurt from all these jumps, running in combat, banging your knees on everything, in and out of trucks, 7 tons, and I've always whacked my shins.
That brings me to the point, right? So you were a VSO, right, in a past life, and so you've had the unique opportunity. I mean, I'm a medical background, so you've had the unique opportunity to have veterans sit across the table from you, coming in and saying, hey, what do I do? I've got these disabilities or I got these medical problems. How do I go about this? I mean, what would you say, or, having in your shoes, your experience, to help veterans navigating that?
Just so that everybody knows, if you have a bad VSO, you have every right to choose another VSO, and you don't have to stick to your state. And they're everywhere, but you don't have to be tied down to that VSO if you're having issues with the VSO. Once they leave your office, you spend an hour with them and you hear their story. Now you have to backtrack and you have to collaborate with their story. And sometimes there's missing pieces. And so we would try to get it service connected, and we would say, okay, we're going to put it through, but it's not going to be a guarantee because there is some sort of missing documentation.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of times it gets denied. And then they come to me upset, and then they're wondering what they need to do next. And it's like, well, now you're going to need to get a nexus letter.
We need to make the audience aware we're not a VSO. We're not a claims rep. We're not, a claims attorney. So we don't give it a legal advice, and we're not, what we do is we do the independent medical opinions, or the nexus letters like you were talking about.
Right.
Can you explain to the audience what is a nexus letter from your point of view?
A nexus letter, I always explained it as it is a way to link something to military service. How did you get this in the service, even though you didn't say anything about it in the service? But there's, proven fact that, all these jumps, et cetera, you're going to have knee issues, you're going to have back issues. And sometimes they need that extra explanation from a medical doctor explaining why.
In order to get service connected, right, we got to realize it's not just a medical process, it's really a legal process. And so you really need 2 things to get service connected for disability. One, you got to have disability. Right. You got to have a diagnosis. You can't just, I see a lot of guys, they come back and say, yeah, I got declined. I was like, well, did you have a diagnosis of GERD? Oh, no, not yet. Oh, well, you got to have a disability. So that's number 1. And then number 2 is you got to have the nexus event. And, you're 100% right. Nexus event is essentially that bridge between the claimed disability and your military service. It can also be it doesn't have to just be your military service. It can also be to one of your other currently service-connected disabilities.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's the difference between, a primary versus a secondary claim, correct?
Right. You have some sort of mental disorder or things like that, or you have tinnitus, and, it's been going on for years and years and years, and then all of a sudden, 30 years later, you're like, oh, I'm diagnosed with sleep apnea.
Common one.
That's very common, and it's probably the most common denied, because the VA doesn't have many studies out. The only tried true method is combat PTSD, and that's pretty much just about it. Other than that, it's nexus letter.
You were, VSO, past life, and so you've seen veterans that have come and when they've won without nexus letters, but you've also seen your fair share of nexus letters.
Oh, very, very much.
So, in your opinion, are they all the same? Are they different?
One, I will put this out there: nobody in the VA will write a nexus letter. That is full in teeth.
Even though they're allowed to.
They're allowed to.
Yeah.
They're supposed to. But there's an M21 law that says that they have to, but they won't.
we do things a little different, right? So we're putting in the narrative, we're putting in the causation, the aggravation, we're putting in peer-reviewed medical studies, and we're also putting in legal cases and that precedents that have already been set by the VA that we, leverage to that veteran's advantage. So, and that's why we've seen a lot of success. I can give you some experiences, right? So I had a veteran come to me for sleep apnea, right? And he was using a psychologist to write him sleep apnea secondary to PTSD. First of all, you shouldn't be using a non-medical doctor or practitioner to be doing anything beyond mental health. And, it was denied. And so I took him in and, we did the whole process, reviewed all the stuff, got his letter, a couple months later, I reach out and sure enough, this is his third time applying and he got it through. Very grateful, but it was just the process that we did it. We follow the same process for everyone. It's very personalized for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. 100%. I don't like seeing cookie cutter, everyone is unique and we treat them as a unique case and we pour a lot of love and effort into each letter. Would you say so?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, there's not many Nexus letters that you're going to see out there that's probably 13, 14 pages long.
The goal is if this sits in front of a judge and it's my name is on it or any of our providers' names are on it,
correct,
can we back it up in the court of law, right? And will it stand on its own 2 feet? We want to create letters and medical opinions that are so airtight and light tight that it becomes nearly impossible to deny.
Right.
And we've had a lot of success.
Very much so. There's no one's ever called back and said, hey, we need to revamp it or we need to do another Nexus letter. I haven't taken a call yet.
And we've done hundreds of veterans at this point, hundreds. And I can count on my hand how many have not gone through the CMP exam, but then we help them out free of charge with an appeal letter or rebuttal letter. Right. And none of it failed at the appeals level. So we're batting 1,000 right now, which is pretty good. And something that we put our hat on, we're very proud of.
Right.
At this point. And we want to continue that level of excellence. I want to talk about what makes Xterra Health different. We're talking about what makes the letters different, but what really makes us stand out from other companies or organizations or practices that do this? One of the things is cost. You've touched on it, Josh, right?
Yeah. With how some of these people are quite predatory.
Predatorial is a great way of putting it, right? So, less than 1% of the nation serves in the military, in the armed forces. So that by de facto makes veterans a very vulnerable population. Mm-hmm. And when you're a vulnerable population, it makes it easier to be a victim.
Well, it's a victim.
And veterans inherently are trustful people, so if a medical provider is saying, oh yeah, we'll help you, a lot of times veterans are like, okay, what do I have to do? And when it comes to the VA disability claims process, they usually are so exhausted and desperate that they're willing to do whatever the next person tells them what to do. If they say, oh yeah, we can do this for you.
Right.
So it's not unusual. I've seen some of our competitors, thousands of dollars, $1,000 for a letter, $3,000 for one letter. And I'm talking about just one disability claim.
And most people are doing multiples because they're trying to get everything connected because they're started or they've been fighting this for years and years.
Or another tactic I like to see is that I see a lot of competitors using is, oh yeah, we'll, it's low cost, but you've got to pay X amount of money up front so we can review your medical charts.
Right. To me, that sounds like a trap. You're basically trapping them.
I 100% agree. I think at that point, the veteran now is sunk lost it, right? Well, now we're committed. I got to use them, right?
Right.
So it's a kind of I gotcha kind of thing. And again, right, you're paying up front for a service. You have no idea. You have no idea what that letter is going to look like. You don't know the competency of that provider, the track record of that provider. You're going completely off just blind trust. So how do we do it differently?
You're doing a free consult. You look at the Nexus letters or you look at their medical records and then you send them drafts and you let them see the drafts and you let them see the whole process as it goes. And they have every say along that way.
Yeah, we want to make this a collaborative process, right? Because as medical providers, we are just the mouthpiece for their journey, their disability. We're seeing them for a couple hours of this journey that's been bothering them for years, decades even. And so, yes, it's a free consultation. You should not pay any money up front. And there is no charge until the very end. You have to be happy with the letter that we're producing. We want them to be part of that as well. So we'll see you for free, the consultation, and then we review all of your records for free. No one else is doing that. We'll review your records for free.
Right.
And we don't have you sign a contract. There's no obligation because we want to empower the veteran. We want them to feel this is their journey, right?
Right.
And if they want to back out anytime, they feel uncomfortable, they don't like what they're seeing, they can leave. And, there's no obligation to time down. And we try to keep the prices as low as possible. No hidden costs, no hidden fees. It's $500 for a letter. And I think a lot of times there's a lot of confusion, right? A lot of people think a letter means, okay, that's just per disability.
And I get that question very often on the phone before, they call me first because I'm the first voice they hear.
Mm-hmm.
They're like $500 a nexus letter. And I'm like, oh, well, if you're doing this and this and this and the head, shoulders, knees, and toes song. And I say that to everybody. If this and this and this all connects to one thing, that I was like, most likely, Dr. Bahr is going to put that together to substantiate how your claims or how your nexus letter is going to go. And you're not going to be adding so many, to not make them have to pay so much.
Yeah, and this is another common exploitative process that we see is these companies will say, oh yeah, it's per disability. Oh, but if you do 3 disabilities, we'll give you a little discount. That's just, it's robbery, right? I mean, if the disabilities are all from the same thing, the same nexus event, they should all go in the same letter.
Right.
One, if you don't do it that way, it looks suspicious to the C&P examiner when they come in with like 10 letters.
Right.
For musculoskeletal things, right? From the same issue.
From the same thing over,
So you're 100%. That's what we do. If it's musculoskeletal, head, shoulders, knees, back, from being a paratrooper, or it's secondary to their broken ankle they had. It all goes into one letter because it all is from the same issue. And that goes for, other issues too. So, we often see a lot of these intermediate steps with obesity, right? There are some disabilities that can be tied to that.
Right.
And so if, say their PTSD has led to this, weight gain, which then in turn leads to some of these other disabilities, we will put them all into one letter. So, that includes sometimes sleep apnea, diabetes, hypertension. They all go into one letter. So instead of paying for 3 separate letters, they're paying for just one letter. So they're doing 3 claims and only paying for one letter.
Right.
So I think the key when we started this is we didn't want cost to be a barrier to getting connection and treatment that veterans deserve.
It's their money. They deserve that money. And, I always felt when I was as a VSO, when I saw these people paying thousands, I've seen people use a lawyer and they're paying them $20,000 of the back pay. I wish you would have talked to us before. Mm-hmm. We're free. We're state funded, federally funded, and it's like, oh man, you waste so much money on that. Or people who get robbed with this $3,000 per nexus letter, and it's like, man, you're really just taking it away from the veteran.
Even though you get a nexus letter, there is no guarantee that your claim is going to be approved. So I think you have to be careful. If the company's promising you that, if you use us, we 100% guarantee you're going to be service connected. That is a bold-faced lie.
That is a bold-faced lie.
So I think a lot of veterans need to take that into consideration when they're choosing who do they use, right? Because if they're taking a gamble and a risk, $3,000 for a letter that may not work, well, then they're out $3,000. With us, we wanted to keep the price point very low. So, in the off chance that it didn't work, they didn't blow all their money. The reality is there's a lot of veterans that are on fixed incomes. There's a lot of Americans on fixed incomes. Right now, it's, money's not very, readily available for a lot of people.
Yeah. And then they don't go with the claim because they're like, I can't afford it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't want to do it because they're scared and that they're going to lose out on their money.
So if someone wants to learn more about us at Xterra Health, how do they learn about us? Where do they go to sign up for services, read more about what we offer?
There's so much social media. We have the Facebook page. There's the LinkedIn page. You can search our names. There's a link, you could follow that link. I've seen Reddit threads about it. But my best advice is to go to Xterra.health.com.
Xterrahealth.com, right? Yeah.
Yes, that's everything in that website. It explains everything. It explains who we are. There's nothing hidden. Everything's so transparent on the website.
Yeah, if they got questions, reach out. We'll answer them for you.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I think I just want to thank the audience for listening. If you're interested, we'd love for you to like and subscribe.
Most definitely.
Follow us on all our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and we're growing every day. And this is the website, right? It's www.xterrahealth.com to learn more. And I think I just want to leave the audience and the listeners with one final thought. I was a Ranger, and part of the Ranger creed is never leave a fallen comrade. And that is an ethos which I have lived by. And I'm sure the Navy and the Marines have got their own mantra, but that is one thing that I've taken to heart, and which has kind of formulated the foundation of Xterra Health. And, ultimately, this podcast, we want to make every veteran mission ready for their VA disability claim process.
Yes, most definitely. And it gives them the info that they need to help them along this process, and we're along that journey.
Yeah. Well, tune in next week. All right.
Yes. Next week.
All right.